Welcome to the Economic Rockstar Podcast with your host, Frank Conway, connecting brilliant minds in economics and finance.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Economic Rockstar Podcast. This week I've just done something a little different, and it's more so a bonus episode, which is about 15 minutes long, taken from an interview I had with Professor Vernon Smith. I tend to like to keep my episodes about 1 hour in duration, and with the conversation I've had with Professor Vernon Smith, it went over that time, and I decided to cut out about 15 minutes and place it on the Patreon page to allow patrons of the Economic Rockstar podcast exclusive access to such recordings. However, it was always my intention to release these episodes or release these conversations over a period of time for everyone else to access. So here's 15 minutes with Professor Vernon Smith, in which I ask him who he'd like to meet if time travel was possible, and he gives us some candid insights into his responses. And again, if you'd like to support the podcast in any way, why not go over to patreon.com/economic rockstar and select any of the funding possibilities, which includes supporting the podcast for only $1 a month. So enjoy this part of my conversation with Nobel laureate Professor Vernon Smith. I would have loved to have actually spoken to you about your transition toward resource economics and also your wilderness resources, the papers you've written. But can I ask you a couple of quick-fire questions, if you don't mind?
Yes.
If you could step into the DeLorean and time travel, what era would you go back to? Who would you like to speak to, and what conversation would you think you would have?
Oh, I would just love to go back to the period of the Scottish Enlightenment. And that was an absolutely remarkable period from roughly 1740, 45, something like that, to maybe about 1800, 1790, something like this, in Edinburgh, Scotland, which was a pretty ordinary city. In fact, it had a sewage problem and kind of stunk. And somehow Edinburgh brought forth David Hume, Adam Smith, were two of the shining lights, but also others. There's Hutton was a geologist. He kind of created geology in that period. And Joseph Black was at Glasgow University, where Adam Smith was a professor, and Joseph Black was an early physical chemist and did basic experiments showing that air is not one gas. There must be more than one gas in it, because he did an experiment. Essentially what he did was to burn the oxygen out of the air, and the air weighed less. So it was early experiments like that. And so this was a very exciting period, because that's when, Adam Smith wrote two books that we look back upon today, and it's just astounding how influential they were and how deep they were intellectually. And he's best known for his second book, The Wealth of Nations. And I read that at the University of Kansas. Richard Howey assigned it, and we read it carefully. Never once did Adam Smith mention that he had written an earlier book, Serial Moral Sentiments, and economists just didn't know that book. We only knew The Wealth of Nations. Well, that book created economics, the field of economics. In Smith's day, you taught natural philosophy, and you might study mathematics, physics. These would be things that you would study under natural philosophy, and also political and what later came to be known as economic systems were also studied. Well, he wrote the book that basically created the field of economics. That was in 1776. Earlier, he had written in 1759 the Theory of Moral Sentiments, and And I didn't discover that book until much later in my career. And the more I read it, the more it's just incredibly important. This was a work in social psychology. It didn't create the field of psychology because humanity wasn't ready for it yet. But it's it's extremely perceptive, and that has, and my colleague Bart Wilson and I here at Chapman University, we've been doing, for decades, we've been doing two-person games, interaction games of various kinds, trust games, for example. And Adam Smith has given us a whole new perspective on those games. Who would believe that? Something written in 1759 would provide a way of thinking that enabled you, that gave you insights into these games, which kind of modern mathematical economics failed to give us. And that's a lot of that work. Most interesting part of it has been in the last 10 years. So this has been a great new discovery period for me.
Coincidentally, I was invited to speak at the University of Glasgow's Adam Smith Business School, and I'm writing the notes from this conversation on paper from the Adam Smith's Business School. I thought you might like to know that.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's great. Well, they've discovered Adam Smith.
Yes, that's true.
There was no, there's a statue of David Hume in a tomb in Edinburgh. There's a statue of Bobby Burns on the street there of Edinburgh. There was no statue of Adam Smith. And the Adam Smith Institute, of course, raised money and created it. And I had the great honor of unveiling that statue.
Oh, wow.
That was in...
Very nice.
Yeah, that was Iman Butler. He first asked the Queen, of course, if she would come, and she declined. And so then he asked me, and so it was just a great time. So there this was July 4th, 2010.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine? July 4th in Edinburgh. And an American,
yes,
is being asked to unveil this statue of this guy who wrote this phenomenal book in 1776. And so, of course, Adam Smith was very. What's interesting about Adam Smith, you see, was that he opposed empire. He opposed colonialism. He opposed mercantilism. He was opposed to taxation without representation. He wrote on the point that the colonies, yes, they should bear part of the cost, the burden that undertaken by the British government, but they shouldn't be taxed without being participants in that process. So he was really on the same page, you see, that the American revolutionists were. And the founders of the American Republic, you see Jefferson and Franklin and Washington and Adams, all these guys would have read Adam Smith. They would have known Princeton. Some of them studied at Princeton. Princeton, part of the curriculum did include the Wealth of Nations and the Theory of Moral Sentiment. So it was very much part of kind of what the creation of the new country. So anyway, I would love to go back to that period and sit in on some of their meetings. They had a meeting, a Thursday night meeting. They met in a local pub. They would read a paper and discuss it Thursday. And also Adam Smith himself on Sunday evening would have his friends in for dinner. And these were always very, from what I've read about them, what we're able to tell from biographers of Adam Smith, that these were very intense intellectual experiences.
what would you think you would say or ask or contribute?
Well, I guess I think more than anything I would want to learn. Oh, I might ask Adam Smith, also David Hume. I might ask him what they thought of experiments.
Yes.
And what's interesting is that both Hume and Smith use the word experiment. If you do a search, the nice thing about my electronic copies of these books, I can do a search in them. They both use the word experiment. And what that means is, it meant was a case. It's an example. It's some real live event in history or circumstance, an institution, and they would use that to test their way of thinking. Is their thinking correct? If it's correct, it should be able to deal and explain in a natural way what these various cases are about. So they're using the term in exactly the way we use it. You see in the laboratory, it's a case, it's an example, and we use it to confront our knowledge, to test our ability to understand and explain what's going on.
Vernon, just one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Based on your exposure and your exposure to economics, what advice would you give to other economists out there starting out? Or it doesn't have to be economists, it could be general life advice, perhaps.
Well, the thing I tell students in economics is read broadly outside of economics. Within economics, there's a lot of technical material you need to master. And the basic model in economics is maximization under constraint. Okay, well, you can learn that, and then once you learn that, really, a lot of economics is applying that way of thinking over and over in different contexts. But read outside of that, because it's important to be influenced to find ways of thinking outside of that framework. Now, that framework still does a lot of work for us. You see, that's the framework that I first approached supply and demand theory with, and then also the bubbles markets. And you need that framework in order to understand whatever deviations are going on from that model in life. And the first discovery was those markets work better than you might expect. You see, the problem in those days was we didn't have a process way of thinking about how markets work. We had this equilibrium notion, and then imagined what it must be like in order to get that equilibrium. Well, none of that was right, because it was all imagination, and none of it was based upon processes that real people go through. And so that first taught me that the theory is very relevant. What was not relevant was our way of thinking about how those outcomes might actually be achieved by real people. Later discoveries showed that it kind of went the other way. The markets were not working, like the asset markets were not working. The fact that people had complete information wasn't giving you the results you expected. People had to, in the asset markets, actually experience the effect of deviating from that complete information, finding out that actually it was relevant, but they can think of things that might be better than trading at fundamental value. Well, they're wrong, but they have to find that out by experience. Okay?
Vernon, thank you so much for being so inspiring and for joining me on Economic Rockstar. I had a blast and I personally learned a lot from you. Okay,
Frank. Well, thank you. It's been a very pleasant being on your program.
You can find all the links to Vernon on economicrockstar.com/Vernon Smith. Vernon, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. You are an economic rock star.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Do you mind me asking, what music do you like?
Well, I still am kind of a jazz fan.
Yeah.
I grew up with Louis Armstrong and
lovely.
And the big band days, Glenn Miller, Artie Shaw. I loved Artie Shaw. And in fact, I've read, he's got a great biography I read. Artie Shaw lived to be, I think 95.
Oh.
But those are the jazz greats I like, and I still, Ken Burns has a great documentary on jazz that about 10 DVDs, and I watch that over and over. At Purdue, I actually heard Louis Armstrong. In 1957, I went to hear Louis Armstrong. And it was a really great experience. What a lovable, wonderful man he was.
Does this music allow you to travel back in time and reminisce on times past?
Yes, it does. Yeah. I still do that.
The magic of music. Professor Smith, thanks very much, and I really appreciate you taking time out for this lengthy interview. I'm so grateful, and I'll send you an email with links.
Okay, my pleasure. Bye-bye.
And thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye. Economic Rockstar is a free podcast that does not exclude anyone from listening as long as they have a device to listen, download or stream. I have many listeners from all parts of the world, and I truly am pleased to know that the Economic Rockstar podcast unites all of you through the common theme of economics. I strive to commit to releasing an episode each week and aim to develop Economic Rockstar into much more than just a podcast. Patreon is a platform that gives you, the listener of the Economic Rockstar podcast, the opportunity to express your appreciation of the show by committing a financial reward for as little as $1 a month. Patreon allows me, the creator of the Economic Rockstar podcast, to be rewarded and paid by you so I can continue with the running costs of the show and to reinvest and expand the podcast into other platforms or mediums in the future. To find out more on how you can help the Economic Rockstar podcast and have your name added to the supporters list on my website, please check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/Economic Rockstar or visit the supporters page on the Economic Rockstar website. If you enjoyed this podcast, why not leave some feedback or comments on the show notes page on economicrockstar.com, where you can also sign up and be a member of the Economic Rockstar community. If you're listening to this episode on iTunes or Stitcher Radio, I would love to have some feedback and for you to leave an honest rating and review, as this will help with the rankings of the show so that more people can find it. If you're listening on the website economicrockstar.com, make sure you check out the back catalogue of all previous episodes and interviews with some amazing professors and authors at economicrockstar.com/podcasts. Thanks for listening, and I really appreciate your loyal support. I know how much you love audio, so why not get a free audiobook with Economic Rockstar today? I've teamed up with audiobooks.com to bring you this amazing offer. Visit audiobooks.com/rockstar to download your free audiobook now.